Deputy Paul Murphy.
It was James Connolly who described the socialist movement as the great anti-theft movement. He was obviously talking about the whole capitalist system of wage slavery, of the profits of the bosses being made by the exploitation and robbery of workers. He didn't quite have this in mind, which is taking it to an even more extreme, whereby literally you have the theft of what should be part of the workers' wages, and an element of wage theft by unscrupulous employers. It's obviously part, and it finds its prevalence in conditions of precarity, in conditions of very big imbalances of power between employers and workers, and it's also part of an increasingly two-tier economy where, despite the fact that in formal figures the economy is moving ahead and some better off sections are benefiting from that, you have a massive prevalence and expansion of low pay, of precarious conditions, and as part of that, the theft of people's wages in reality, including the theft of their tips. I want to pay tribute to those workers in the Ivy and elsewhere who have spoken out about this, who have put their neck on the line to do that and to expose that reality to all those many customers who think that you leave a tip and it obviously goes to the workers who it's intended for. I was listening to an interview with a worker there who was saying that in the past, maybe 7 restaurants that she's worked in 6 out of those 7, you have the theft of the tips by the employer. So it's obviously a very, very widespread phenomenon. So real testament to those workers for speaking out, and it points obviously to the need for this legislation, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but also the question of organisation in the workplace in unions as the way to defeat unscrupulous employers on this and a whole range of other issues, and to win benefits. Precarious workers in the hospitality sector can be organised. If you look in the north with the establishment of the Unite Hospitality branch, they've shown the way of how it can be done in a number of different employers as well. In the south, workers are getting organised, and that's absolutely crucial. I was listening upstairs to the government's opposition to the bill. I thought their arguments against were very hollow. The idea this is very complicated, you can't deal with it, this bill won't deal with it. I think this bill deals with it in a very simple and clear way by saying that the tip that is given is the property of the worker who it is given to, and it seems to me the simplest way of dealing with it, and I welcome it. But in a sense, I just want to make a broader point, and I've had it with the government and their money messages. Like, it's just scandalous. And I think it's time for the opposition to call a halt to this practice by the government. And we have the power to call a halt to it, and we need to do it now. Because in a sense, the government can make its argument against the bill, why they don't think this bill is great, and argue against it. Fine, no problem. But if a majority in this Dáil passes it, as it's been passed by the Seanad on Thursday, well then the government shouldn't find another way of blocking it. It's completely scandalous. It makes a joke of a democracy. People elect TDs to this Dáil to make decisions on a majority basis, and the government now reserves for itself the power to ignore the will of this Dáil. I mean, the way Minister Doherty just threw out that based on standing orders 178, 179, I'm going to suggest that this needs a money message. That's not the role of the Minister in the standing order, to suggest what needs a money message and what doesn't need a money message. That's a prerogative that the government has taken for themselves. It's meant to be an objective question. And as Gino and others have said, progressive bill after progressive bill now being halted by a government after they lose the vote, the Occupied Territories Bill, the Keep It in the Ground Bill, the Sex Education Bill, a whole range of different bills, and now this one. There was a good article by Owen Daly and David Kenny in the Irish Times last week, which made the point that this is a cause of great concern and has the makings of a real democratic and constitutional crisis, that dozens of bills have been blocked because the government's refused to issue money messages. The interpretation of the Constitution by Count Corll and the Government runs against the idea of democracy by majority vote and the spirit and purpose of the Constitution. A minority government should not have a general power to override legislation passed by democratic parliament, and yet that is what has come to pass. And that's come to pass again and again and again. And I would suggest to everybody in the opposition, and ultimately Fianna Fáil will decide, that we end this situation. And we end the situation by amending standing orders to bring standing orders in line with the Constitution. We get rid of the reference to incidental expenses, and so we stop this nonsense whereby bills that have nothing to do with expenditure of money by the state whatsoever are stopped, because it's not the purpose of the provision in the Constitution. It was never what was intended, and it's being abused repeatedly to stop the democratic will of the Dáil being enacted, and it's time that we called a halt to it. Thanks.